brought the rain under our control. But I don't propose to tell you any more, in case I turn you into a rival grower, in the same way as Aegialus has turned me into a competitor of his. Letter number 88. You want to know my attitude towards liberal studies. Well, I have no respect for any study whatsoever if its end is the making of money. Such studies are to me unworthy ones. They involve the putting out of skills to hire, and are only of value insofar as they may develop the mind without occupying it for long. Time should be spent on them only so long as one's mental abilities are not up to dealing with higher things. They are our apprenticeship, not our real work. Why liberal studies are so called is obvious. It is because they are the ones considered worthy of a free man. But there is really only one liberal study that deserves the name, because it makes a person free, and that is the pursuit of wisdom. Its high ideals, its steadfastness and spirit make all other studies puerile and puny in comparison. Do you really think there is anything to be said for the others when you find among the people who profess to teach them quite the most reprehensible and worthless characters you could have as teachers? All right to have studied that sort of thing once, but not to be studying them now. The question has sometimes been posed whether these liberal studies make a man a better person. But in fact, they do not aspire to any knowledge of how to do this, let alone claim to do it. Literary scholarship concerns itself with research into language or history, if a rather broader field is preferred, or, extending its range to the very limit, poetry. Which of these paves the way to virtue? Attentiveness to words, analysis of syllables, accounts of myths, laying down the principles of prosody? What is there in all this that dispels fear, roots out desire, or reins in passion? Or let us take a look at music, at geometry. You will not find anything in them which tells us not to be afraid of this or desire that. And if anyone lacks this kind of knowledge, all his other knowledge is valueless to him. The question is whether or not that sort of scholar is teaching virtue, for if he is not, he will not even be imparting it incidentally. If he is teaching it, he is a philosopher. If you really want to know how far these persons are from the position of being moral teachers, observe the absence of connection between all the things they study. If they were teaching one and the same thing, a connection would be evident. Unless perhaps they manage to persuade you that Homer was actually a philosopher, though they refute their case by means of the very passages which lead them to infer it. For at one moment they make him a Stoic, giving nothing but virtue his approval, steering clear of pleasure, not even an offer of immortality inducing him to stoop to the dishonourable. At another, they make him an Epicurean, praising the way of life of a society passing its days at peace and ease, in an atmosphere of dinner parties and music-making. At another, he becomes a peripatetic, with a threefold classification of things good. At another, an academic, stating that nothing is certain. It is obvious that none of these philosophies is to be found in Homer, for the very reason that they all are, the doctrines being mutually incompatible. Even suppose we grant these people that Homer was a philosopher, he became a wise man, surely, before he could recite any epics, so that what we should be learning are the things which made him wise. And there is no more point in my investigating which was the earlier, Homer or Hesiod, than there would be in my knowing the reason why Hecuba, though younger than Helen, carried her years so unsuccessfully. And what, I would ask this kind of scholar, do you suppose is the point of trying to establish the ages of Patroclus and Achilles? And are you more concerned to find out where Ulysses' wanderings took him than to find a way of putting an end to our own perpetual wanderings? We haven't the time to spare to hear whether it was between Italy and Sicily that he ran into a storm, or somewhere outside the area of the world we know. Wanderings as extensive as his could never in fact have taken place inside so limited an area, when every day we're running into our own storms, spiritual storms, and driven by vice into all the troubles that Ulysses ever knew. We are not spared those eye-distracting beauties or attackers, We too have to contend in various places with savage monsters reveling in human blood, insidious voices that beguile our ears, shipwrecks and all manner of misfortune. What you should be teaching me is how I may attain such a love for my country, my father, and my wife, and keep on course for those ideals even after shipwreck. Why go into the question whether or not Penelope completely took in her contemporaries and was far from being a model of wifely purity, any more than the question whether or not she had a feeling that the man she was looking at was Ulysses before she actually knew it? Teach me instead what purity is, how much value there is in it, whether it lies in the body or in the mind. Turning to the musical scholar, I say this. You teach me how bass and treble harmonize, or how strings producing different notes can give rise to concord. I would rather you brought about some harmony in my mind and got my thoughts into tune. You show me which are the plaintive keys. I would rather you showed me how to avoid uttering plaintive notes when things go against me in life. The geometrician teaches me how to work out the size of my estates, rather than how to work out how much a man needs in order to have enough. He teaches me to calculate, putting my fingers into the service of avarice, instead of teaching me that there is no point whatsoever in that sort of computation, and that a person is none the happier for having properties which tire accountants out. Or, to put it another way, how superfluous a man's possessions are when he would be a picture of misery if you forced him to start counting up single-handed how much he possessed. What use is it to me to be able to divide a piece of land into equal areas if I'm unable to divide it with a brother? What use is the ability to measure out a portion of an acre with an accuracy extending even to the bits which elude the measuring rod if I'm upset when some high-handed neighbor encroaches slightly on my property? The geometrician teaches me how I may avoid losing any fraction of my estates, but what I really want to learn is how to lose the lot and still keep smiling. But I'm being turned off the land my father and grandfather owned before me. Well, so what? Who owned the land before your grandfather? Are you in a position to identify the community, let alone the individual, to whom it originally belonged? You entered on it as a tenant, not an absolute owner. Whose tenant, you may ask? Your heirs, and that only if you're lucky. The legal experts say that acquisition by prescription never applies where the property concerned is actually public property. Well, what you possess and call your own is really public property, or mankind's property for that matter. Oh, the marvels of geometry! You geometers can calculate the areas of circles, can reduce any given shape to a square, can state the distances separating stars. Nothing's outside your scope when it comes to measurement. Well, if you're such an expert, measure a man's soul. Tell me how large or how small that is. You can define a straight line. What use is that to you, if you've no idea what straightness means in life? I come now to the person who prides himself on his familiarity with the heavenly bodies. Towards which quarter chilly Saturn draws, the orbits in which burning Mercury roams. What is to be gained from this sort of knowledge? Am I supposed to feel anxious when Saturn and Mars are in opposition, or Mercury sets in the evening in full view of Saturn, instead of coming to learn that bodies like these are equally propitious wherever they are, and incapable of change in any case? They are swept on in a path from which they cannot escape, their motion governed by an uninterrupted sequence of destined events, making their reappearance in cycles that are fixed. They either actuate or signalize all that comes about in the universe. If every event is brought about by them, how is mere familiarity with a process which is unchangeable going to be of any help? If they are pointers to events, what difference does it make to be aware in advance of things you cannot escape? They are going to happen, whether you know about them or not. If you observe the hasting sun and watch the stars processing through the skies, the day that follows will not prove you wrong, nor will deceptive cloud-free nights then take you in. I've taken sufficient precautions, more than sufficient precautions, to ensure that I'm not taken in by deceptive phenomena. Or at this you'll protest, can you really say the day that follows never proved me wrong? Surely anything that happens which one didn't know in advance was going to happen proves one wrong. Well, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know what's capable of happening. And none of this will give rise to any protest on my part. I'm ready for everything. If I'm let off in any way, I'm pleased. The day in question proved me wrong, in a sense, if it treats me leniently, but even so, not really wrong. For just as I know that anything is capable of happening, so also do I know that it's not bound to happen. So I look for the best, and I'm prepared for the opposite. You'll have to bear with me if I digress here. Nothing will induce me to accept painters into the list of liberal arts, any more than sculptors, marble masons, and all the other attendants on extravagance. I must equally reject those oil and dust practitioners, the wrestlers, or else I shall have to include in the list the perfumers and cooks and all the others who place their talents at the service of our pleasures. What is there, I ask you, that's liberal about those characters who vomit up their food to empty their stomachs for more, with their bodies stuffed full and their minds all starved and inactive? Can we possibly look on this as a liberal accomplishment for the youth of Rome, whom our ancestors trained to stand up straight and throw a javelin, to toss the caber and manage a horse and handle weapons? They never used to teach their children anything which could be learned in a reclining posture. That kind of training, nevertheless, doesn't teach or foster moral values any more than the other. What's the use, after all, of mastering a horse and controlling him with the reins at full gallop if you're carried away yourself by totally unbridled emotions? What's the use of overcoming opponent after opponent in the wrestling or boxing rings if you can be overcome by your temper? So we don't, you may ask, in fact gain anything from the liberal studies. As far as character is concerned, no. But we gain a good deal from them in other directions. Just as even these admittedly inferior arts, which we've been talking about, the ones that are based on the use of the hands, make important contributions to the amenities of life, although they have nothing to do with character. Why then do we give our sons a liberal education? Not because it can make them morally good, but because it prepares the mind for the acquisition of moral values. Just as that grounding in grammar, as they called it in the old days, in which boys are given their elementary school